This is America on the Road, named Best Radio Show by the International Automotive Media Conference, and now in its 31st year on the air. Thanks for being with us as we bring you the latest automotive information from around the world. I'm Jack Nerad. With me is co-host Chris Teague. Chris, it is great to see you. I hope things are great in your wonderful state of Maine.
They are exceptionally hot and humid, which is a pain when you live in a house that is as old as the country itself. So other than that, we're doing well. How are you?
Yeah, things are going well. Back from vacation, and you know how that goes, but hanging in there. As we say, we've got a lot of news to talk about, as we usually do. J.D. Power has just released a study that shows that electric vehicles are more affordable than ever, at least the way they count it. And it also asks the question, where are the buyers? So we'll have more on that coming up. Interesting that EVs are getting cheaper in terms of cost to own, but fewer buyers. Nissan has introduced a new off-road version of its popular Rogue compact SUV. We'll have the details on that. A battle is looming over future vehicle emissions regulations as the state of Ohio has joined a suit against California's regulations. We're having a minor civil war, I guess, on regulations. And there's a Supreme Court ruling that could figure into all of this too, so we'll talk about that. We'll have another warning about a safety threat that could be right in front of you when you drive because counterfeit airbag replacements are resulting in fatalities. So we'll tell you how to avoid becoming a victim. You don't want you victimized. So ton to talk about, right, Chris?
Yeah, it's an exciting week.
Yeah, so much going on. America on the Road is brought to you by drivingtoday.com, emlancy.com, the publisher of my latest book, Dance in the Dark, and of course, Mercury Insurance. If you're looking to save some money, you should switch to Mercury for your auto and home insurance. Californians save an average of $670 with Mercury. So imagine how much you could save. Get a quote today at drivingtoday.com/auto insurance. That's drivingtoday.com/auto-insurance. Well, as you longtime listeners know, Chris lives at one end of the country. I live at the other. Each week we get together to talk about cars, the car industry, and how you can save some money on your car. And of course, we road test a couple of vehicles, and you have a very cool road test vehicle this week, Chris.
I drove the 2024 Subaru Crosstrek Sport. I can't wait to tell you all about it.
Right. My test car this week is the 2024 Volkswagen Atlas SEL Premium R Line, a long name for a very big vehicle, and I had a chance to drive it here in Southern California, and I took one of my famous jaunts out to the desert and back in this vehicle, so we'll tell you about that. This week, our special guest is Kalifa Sprowl. She is Senior Series Planner of large trucks and SUVs for Toyota. The good news is she's an expert on the all-new 2024 Toyota Landcruiser, a very cool car that I had a chance to drive recently, so we'll talk to her about that coming up. So we have a lot of show for you this week. Stay with us, and we'll be right back right here on America on the Road. Welcome back to America on the Road with Chris Teague. This is Jack Nerad back with you. We're so glad you're with us. We do appreciate it. A lot of news going on this week, and this J.D. Power study is very interesting to me, Chris. They have done a study of potential EV buyers, what's going on with cost to own with EVs, and there's good news there, but the big question they ask are, where are all the buyers? Well, one of them happens to be in the Chris Teague household, I think, but not a ton of them. What's your overall reaction to what's going on with EVs?
Yeah, I got to tell you, we recently purchased a Honda Prologue, and the lease deal on it was just absolutely over the top. I mean, we're paying under $300 a month for what was almost a $60,000 SUV. So the incentives are definitely there. I think there's still a lot of questions, Jack, about charging and longevity that people have. And even though the cost of ownership may be lower, there's still just a lot of questions, like I said.
Yeah, I think that's what people are seeing. And I think when people have questions, they pause. I mean, the way J.D. Power figures it, a premium EV cost to own has fallen to $62,600. And a mainstream EV, $58,100. That doesn't seem like a big difference, I think, between a premium and a mainstream. And I think maybe that's part of the problem here. But basically, EV consideration and sales have been flat. EVs as a percentage of overall buying certainly flat. Has never reached 10% of the marketplace. I think it's hovering around 8.4 or something like that. And that's just not going to get it done, is it?
No, it's not. And, I don't really know what the answer is here because we've talked about this before, but EVs are this uniquely political thing in the automotive world, and people don't seem to be in the middle. They're very polarized. They either love them and want to buy one, or staunchly opposed to it. And I don't really know what the solution is going to be there.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Some of it is certainly political, and it divides along political lines. Definitely, I also think there's a question about just overall usability or convenience. And you're going to have that firsthand. You're going to talk about that firsthand and experience it firsthand. But I think a lot of people are concerned about that once every 6 month trip or something like that, when they have to go interstate across several states, and wondering about recharging and all that, and maybe even some stuff locally where it's just inconvenient to charge. I think there's some of that too, that goes into the fact that people are just not stepping up to these EVs. I think also probably the high sticker prices on them are sending people away. At the same time, I think there's a lot of great lease deals on these vehicles right now.
Yeah, I mean, for all the hyperbole, there are some of those concerns are, very legitimate, right? Charging. I mean, we bought an EV and live in Maine, and you've heard me say how bad the situation is here at least 100 times now. But for people who don't have the patience or don't have the knowledge, I guess, that could be a big challenge, a big hurdle.
Yeah. J.D. Power asserts that many premium EVs are now more affordable than comparable gas-powered vehicles. A lot of that has to do with the federal tax credits that you can apply to those, but also the prices are, somewhat average there. Mainstream buyers, not quite so much, but you're seeing that too. And this is one thing that I thought was pretty interesting. This is about the Ford F-150 Lightning. Of course, their EV. It has what J.D. Power calls the customer-facing transaction price of $53,494 after the federal tax credits. That's $5,000 cheaper than a gas-powered F-150. A lot of people maybe aren't looking at it that way, but kind of interesting. Maybe jumpstart some electric vehicle sales.
Yeah, there's still a lot of new 2023 model Lightnings around here. In fact, my electrician who came by yesterday to give an estimate for our EV charger said that he had just bought one and got an XLT for right around $40,000 after incentives and discounts. So they're coming down.
Right. Well, here's a vehicle that I think it would be pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to driving this. It's the 2025 Nissan Rogue Rock Creek Edition. It's their toe dip, or maybe more than a toe dip, into off-roading. Certainly Nissan Rogue has not had an off-road reputation before now, but this got off-road tires, all-terrain tires. That's a good place to start. And then some other stuff that's valuable, including the around view monitor that has an off-road view. What's your take on the Rogue?
Yeah, I mean, it's got the looks, but I'm not sure how capable it's actually going to be. I mean, the people that are buying these, and Nissan knows this because they did it with the Pathfinder too. You want the appearance that you could go off-road. You want the appearance that you're driving a beefier SUV, and it definitely does that.
Yeah, I really think that's part of it. And, this does have some off-road chops, probably more than most people will ever use, because even people with the heavy-duty off-roaders are driving most of the time on the road, I would think. It does have the intelligent all-wheel drive system, has hill descent control, which is a good thing. They have put a 12-volt power outlet into the cargo area, which is a nice little feature, I think, if you're off-roading and camping somewhere, all of that stuff. Generally kind of looks involved in this thing. It also has, of course, the very fascinating to me 1.5 liter variable compression turbo engine, and which is cool in a lot of ways. Good fuel economy, a lot of power, pretty decent torque. At the same time, pretty complicated. And I'm wondering about that. What's your take on the power plant here?
I think the upside there is that Nissan's been using it for a while now, and I don't think I don't have the data, but I don't think they've seen any mass failures with that engine. But it is very complex, and I don't think it provides the benefit of fuel economy or power that many would expect from that level of complexity.
Yeah, interesting. And also, this vehicle has a CVT transmission, which not necessarily off-road oriented, but we'll see about that. This I found interesting, Chris, and that the state of Ohio now has joined in a suit against California and their imposition of stricter fuel emissions, exhaust emission kind of regulations. What's your take on this? I mean, one state versus another, and then what's going on here?
Well, we might have talked about this in the past, but as California goes, the automotive industry tends to go, right? So that's why we're all driving CARB-approved vehicles right now. But, I don't know. It's a very interesting move from Ohio. I mean, I guess it just shows, their anti-change mentality. I don't know, but also there's more regulation that, a lot of people are really against. So.
Yeah, and I talked about the Supreme Court decision. It affects essentially all kinds of regulations by all agencies across the government. Fairly recent Supreme Court decision, which could affect exhaust emissions regulations and what the EPA decides to do. I mean, what the Supreme Court largely said was this stuff has to be in law approved by Congress, as opposed to regulators interpreting the law and then making things up as they go along. At least that's one interpretation of this. And it could have really far-reaching effects on all kinds of industries, including, of course, the car industry.
Yeah, when you take the power out of the regulators' hands and put it into lawmakers' hands, almost anything can happen. I mean, it's already almost anything is happening. So it'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, at least we elect our lawmakers. We don't elect our regulators. And the regulators are supposed to report to the lawmakers. I think that's the way the federal system is supposed to work, but we shall see. It hasn't always worked out that way. We talked about this on a recent show, these faulty replacement airbag inflators. It's one of the things you talked about very recently. It's a big problem. People are getting killed by this. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the NHTSA said there had been 3 people who have died and several others with what they called life-altering injuries or disfiguring injuries, which is, definitely not a good thing. But, the ongoing airbag recalls, there was one from a company in Tennessee, I think late last year. And then, we're still hearing about Takata airbag recalls. And the concern is that there are just so many ongoing airbag recalls that some of these counterfeit airbags are just slipping under the radar, especially if people are taking their cars to, discount auto shops and places like that, or if they're trying to make the repairs themselves. So it's just as dangerous, if not more so, than the failing airbags that were already in their cars. So I think it's important that people take the time and do their research.
Yeah, the difficult part about this is the counterfeit airbags look like non-counterfeit airbags. That's a big problem. Well, when we come back, we will be road testing a couple of vehicles, including the Subaru Crosstrek and the Volkswagen Atlas. So stay with us for that. We'll have some good road test information for you. So stay with us right here on America on the Road. Welcome back to America on the Road. It is road test time on America on the Road with Chris Teague. This is Jack Red with you, and we're so glad you're with us. We really do appreciate you listening to America on the Road. And let's dive into these road tests, Chris. I mean, you've got a fun vehicle to talk about, one of the most popular Subarus out there. Give us the lowdown.
Yeah, I drove the 2024 Subaru Crosstrek Sport. If you remember, I think it was a couple of months ago now, Jack, I drove the Subaru Crosstrek Wilderness, which is the more off-road oriented version of this vehicle. But it starts at a very reasonable price. I think it's just under $27,000 for the base model. My sport trim was around $31,000, and you can go up to almost $34,000 with the Wilderness. But I think it's a good value. It's a comfortable vehicle. It's easy to live with. So have you driven the Crosstrek recently, and can you give us some thoughts on it?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, certainly it is a bit different from many of its competitors, and I like that. It certainly has, some hatchback tendencies to it, or a feel to it that maybe some of the others don't, and I think a lot of people like that.
Yeah, it's essentially a lifted Impreza wagon. I mean, if we're really getting down to it, but
right.
So it comes standard with a 2.0 liter 4-cylinder. You get 152 horsepower out of that. Starting with the sport trim that I drove, though, you get a 2.5 liter engine, makes 182 horsepower, and all-wheel drive is standard across the line, and as is a continuously variable transmission. But the Wilderness has more than 9 inches of ground clearance, but even the standard models like the one I drove, the Sport, has 8.7 inches of ground clearance, and you actually get more a better approach angle with this vehicle than you did with prior versions of the car. So even though, as we just talked about, most people will probably never take this thing off road, this actually might be an example of, surprising capability in a package that a lot of people probably don't think can do it. The CVT, you do get some engine whining in here. It kind of lets the RPMs hang in places, but the ride quality is good. There's more than enough power to move around town here. I don't think you're going to win any drag races, but it's reasonably comfortable. The ride quality, as I said, is pretty smooth, and the car does a decent job at blocking out the road and the wind noise. So while you can hear the engine and there is some whining and wailing there, it's a pretty comfortable car inside, and again, it's relatively quiet. Excuse me. The Sport gets cloth interior. You can get synthetic leather. Subaru calls it, I think, StarTex in the wilderness trim, but you still get heated seats even with the cloth upholstery. And the front seats in this car, I wish there was a little bit more support. They're very wide, but they're too flat for me. I guess, I want a little bit more bolstering, even though you're not going to be doing much performance driving in this car. There's good space in the front seats. This car had manual seat adjustments, but there's still a good number of settings and movement that you can reach there. And the back seats are pretty spacious. I mean, I wouldn't want to sit three across with two other adult men back there, but my children had no problem fitting back there, both in car seats and in boosters. So no issues there. And you get a pretty big cargo space too, with enough room to hold a giant dog. I think it's 20 cubic feet with the seats upright. So Jack, what do you think of the interior of the Crosstrek? It's pretty functional and not very fancy, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, I think it's very appropriate for that vehicle, and I think it kind of expresses what Subaru people want. I think one of the things about the Subaru brand is they really know their buyers. They really know their buyers, I think, more so than pretty much other brands do, and I think it caters well to them.
Yeah, so even though you're getting cloth, you're getting a stain-resistant cloth interior, so you can throw your dog in there, you can throw your gear in there, and not really worry about messing up too much because it's pretty well built. So I agree with you there. The standard model comes with a 7-inch touchscreen display. You get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. My Sport model came with the larger 11.6-inch display. Jack, we've talked about this quite a few times in recent weeks and months. It is a very feature-rich system in that every single control from the HVAC to the automatic start-stop, everything is built in to this display. I think it's got a good resolution. It's nice and colorful. It's reasonably responsive, but as we've talked about before, it just isn't responsive enough to have all that responsibility, right? If you're going to make everything touchscreen, the touchscreen has to work flawlessly at all times, and it's just a little bit too clunky. For instance, when you start the vehicle up to start the climate controls, you have to wait a little while before it registers touches and things like that. So I think other than the responsiveness, it's a nice screen, but I just wish that there were some physical controls here. And that has been the case with the Forester and the other Crosstrek that I drove. So it's not an isolated thing. It's just a thing with Subaru's infotainment that I don't love, but many people do. So it might just be a personal problem. You get plenty of safety equipment. It comes standard with automatic emergency braking, lane departure warnings, lane keep assist, and adaptive cruise control. But then the Sport model added blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alerts. So you get a good package of safety gear there. So, Jack, I think for the right buyer here, I think my family has loved Subarus, many different versions of them. This is a great value, right? You get good space and decent performance. So yeah, I think it's quite good if you can get around the infotainment, which again might just be a me problem.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's just you. I like the screen controls too. So yeah, 100% get that. I was driving the Volkswagen Atlas, and I remember the time, Chris, when Volkswagen SUVs were always a little bit too small. Yeah. He's nodding, which isn't great radio, but it is absolutely true. And the Atlas is not that. Absolutely not that. As mid-size 3-row SUVs go, this is a big one. And I think that's a good thing. I think there's a lot to like about the roominess of this, about the interior space. The second row is like limousine-like legroom, all of that kind of stuff. I was driving the Atlas SEL Premium R line, which is the top-of-the-line version. And, well, I'll tell you all about it. There's some new stuff for 2024, and maybe the biggest thing is the engine change. There's a turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, which I will talk about as I talk about the driving thing a little bit later. But There are a lot of different versions of this thing. There are 6 different trim levels, as I mentioned. The one we drove was the top of the line, and I had a chance to drive this not only here in Southern California, but out to the desert and back, kind of a long freeway jaunt. So I got, I think, a lot of family car kind of driving in that thing. It starts at about $39,000, but the vehicle I had was well over $50,000. As I say, top of the line, filled with stuff. Even at mid-range, it's about $50,000, and then the vehicle I was driving was about $54,000 with a ton of good stuff. 21-inch wheels. It has some styling elements that set it apart from the other ones out there. You're not going to see yourself on every corner in a Volkswagen Atlas anyway, so that's pretty cool. It has power folding mirrors. This had the Harman Kardon premium audio system, which was a wonderful thing, although my wife insisted on playing country music all the time, so I don't know that you get super high fidelity out of that. It has a semi-automated parking system and a surround view camera system. As I mentioned, I love the interior of this vehicle. Tons of space for adult passengers kind of throughout, even in the third row. And in most third rows in this class, a little tight in the third row. So for adults, Volkswagen uses a synthetic leather on a lot of the trim pieces, which is, kind of a classy touch. And there's a lot of cargo space, 20.6 cubic feet of cargo space behind the third row of seats. So that's a nice amount of space. And then it expands to 96.8 cubic feet if you fold everything down. It has a 12-inch touchscreen infotainment system, which is nice. Great wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interface, all of that stuff. An issue, though, sounds like we're talking about Subarus, is there's a lot of the replacement of knobs with sliders on the touchscreen, those kind of things, which I'm not a big fan of. Maybe I'm a Luddite. Maybe I admit I'm an old guy. I get that. But I think it's just easier, especially as you're driving along, to reach over and grab a knob, as I am doing the simulation of that here in the studio, versus trying to find a touch screen and hit it as you're bouncing up and down a little bit and doing all of that stuff. What's your kind of overall take on that, Chris?
Yeah, one of the things I really love about my GR Corolla, other than the driving experience, is the fact that I have a physical climate control knobs, a physical volume knob, and things like that make it easy to do, as you say, while you're driving. Because once you build the muscle memory, you can just grab for the whatever it is and turn the knob or push the button. But pecking around on a touchscreen can be tricky.
Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about power. As I say, I drove this on freeways at freeway speeds, among other things, and a lot of different tests as we do, of course. It has a turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that offers 269 horsepower, 273 pound-feet of torque. Those are good numbers. I guess there's a little bit of turbo lag in this thing. I wasn't sure whether it was turbo lag or maybe the way the transmission was operating. It almost felt as if it had a CVT, Chris. It kind of droned a little bit, and then you would get some power. And I'm like, it doesn't have a CVT. It actually has an 8-speed automatic transmission. But have you experienced stuff like that? It's kind of strange, I thought.
Well, the last Atlas that I drove was in 2018, and I didn't experience that issue, but they have changed the engine lineup since then. So it could be just a change with that.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't troubling. It was just a little bit different than, some of the others I've experienced. So I did like the vehicle a lot. It's reasonably quick. It'll do 0 to 60 in about 8 seconds. So that's not too bad. And the fuel economy is pretty good at 23 miles per gallon combined. So that's good. Gets a 5-star rating from NHTSA. So all around, I like the vehicle a lot. One thing interesting about it, though, and this also kind of refers back to a J.D. Power study, I guess the IQS study, the initial quality study. There is an interesting smell to the interior, and it's not a particularly good smell. And what J.D. Power has found this year is a lot of vehicles, for one reason or another, there's a lot of complaints about the interior odor of vehicles. And maybe you've encountered that too, Chris.
I have. If you recall, a few years back when Hyundai first released the Palisade, they had many issues with people complaining of off-gassing materials and, funny smelling seats. But the more complex materials that they're using, the more opportunity there is for weird smells to come out. One of the things I used to love about old Volkswagens was that melted crayon smell that they all kind of had, and you just don't get that anymore.
Yeah. So interesting vehicles. I think we have vehicles that are very appropriate for fans of those particular brands. And I would say take a look at an Atlas. It's probably not first on your list as a 3-row midsize, but certainly worth a look, and does a lot of things right, including the size. So that's terrific. And when we come back, we will have a lengthy interview with Kalifa Sprowl, who is a senior product planner of large trucks for Toyota, and she's an expert on the 2024 Toyota Landcruiser. So stay with us for that. We'll have a very in-depth interview with her about the Landcruiser. So stay with that. That's coming up, and we'll be right back right here on America on the Road. Welcome back, everybody, to America on the Road. Jack Nerad back with you. We have a terrific guest for you talking about a terrific vehicle, a legendary vehicle, and I don't use that term loosely either. The Toyota Landcruiser has become a legend over the course of many, many decades. And Kalifa Sprowl, who is a senior series planner at Toyota Motor North America, otherwise known as Toyota, and a product marketing person there for Landcruiser, is with us to tell us all about it. Number one, this is a legendary vehicle, isn't it, Kalifa?
It is. For about 70 years, it's been the case.
Yeah, just one of the first Toyota vehicles, I think, to come to the U.S. market, and in a lot of ways, back in those days, a Jeep competitor. It has gone through several iterations, got a lot bigger, became maybe more suburban than before, and now kind of, in a lot of ways, going back to its roots. Talk to us about that, would you?
Yeah, you nailed it. Just quick little history timeline here. But yeah, for about 70 years, it's kind of been that off-roading partner of choice, known globally, not just in the Americas, but it really kind of got its claim, or rather, Toyota itself got its claim to fame with the Land Cruiser, known for its off-road capability, its reliability, that quality, or what we like to call QDR, right? Quality, durability, and reliability. So you have this trifecta essentially built into a vehicle that really kind of helped shape Toyota's credibility in North America. So with that being said, yeah, there's been, as you know, several iterations of Land Cruiser. And to speak to this most recent one, this is definitely more so, like you said, a return to its roots, a return to form, really kind of taking the clock backwards and forwards at the same time. I think it's a great way to kind of capture that. But we really just tried to go back to what's the Land Cruiser nameplate? What's the DNA at the end of the day? And what essentially where drivers, consumers, if you will, what did they know about the vehicle? And we're kind of like keeping that aspect about it. That being said, obviously, we're also kind of modernizing it, right? How can we make it, how can we innovate? How can we make off-roading not be this exclusionary thing where someone has to be this, you have to kind of be this experienced seasonal person to kind of really get the hang of it. And I think one of the things that really kind of pulls out of this vehicle is the fact that we are making it a lot more of something that is, again, less exclusionary, but more open to anyone who has like the spirit of adventure and wants to get behind the wheel and kind of really wants to go, find themselves, if you will, out in the wild in the Land Cruiser.
Right. I mean, the previous edition, most recent edition before this one of the Land Cruiser was bigger. There were 3-row versions of it, and larger has its advantages and disadvantages. Maybe some disadvantages when in terms of going off-road, for example, maybe not quite as agile. So this vehicle really, and I have had a chance to drive it, returns to the roots of a smaller, more agile, but certainly fully capable vehicle off-road. And that's totally the Land Cruiser DNA, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely something. I mean, yeah, you compare it to because it's been about 3 years since we sold the Land Cruiser in North America, right? And the previous generation, it's a little bit different, right? You not only did you have this probably higher sticker price, right? But you also already had something that was kind of teetering along the line more so of a luxury vehicle, right? Maybe more so on the line of a Lexus, for example. So that being said, we really just kind of stripped it back to basics, right? It's an it's an off-roading vehicle. It's something that you want to take on the trails. It's something you want to outfit, customize, make it rugged. But to your point, like something that's nimble, something that can actually, take on these trails and not be so, I think you used the word already, but like not something that's just so, for lack of a better word, big, essentially, right? On the trails, you want something that you can customize, etc. So this is something that we look at as essentially as an enthusiast blank canvas, right? And there's two trims, two very basic grade strategies, especially in comparison to the prior generation. But you have the Landcruiser 1958. That's your vehicle that has the kind of retro-esque circular headlamps, kind of reminiscent of Landcruisers of the past. But you also have something that, again, is a blank canvas. So if you want to go in there, customize it, rig it up, if you will, you have the freedom to do that. That's probably something that's more for the seasoned overlander, off-roader, if you will. And then you have the Landcruiser grade, right? And that Landcruiser grade is the core kind of a little bit more creature comforts. You have a little bit more of something that you're probably accustomed to nowadays with typical vehicles in terms of just the interior. But at the end of the day, both of those vehicles have that capability baked in from default. So you're not going to compromise on that either if you're in a 1958 grade or the Landcruiser trim. But yeah, all that to say, a lot of that thinking in terms of just, making it, I think simplicity was essentially kind of the theme that went into the engineering, the design, even the interior. You say you have one yourself. I mean, I think you can kind of see the differences between generations of the past and what we're doing now, especially most recent generation Land Cruiser versus the model year 24.
When I was writing about this, and I wrote a review for U.S. News, among other things, what I noted was you've kind of found some white space here for this vehicle. And there isn't a whole lot of white space in this market, right? But this seems to, find a little bit of a niche. Certainly Toyota sells the 4Runner, very, very popular, super capable off-road vehicle. Something I tested actually as recently as this week. This is different than that, maybe a step up or a half a step up from that in a different way. How would you characterize Land Cruiser versus 4Runner, for example?
No, and I love this question because I think it's I'm probably biased because I'm in marketing, but it's such an exciting question to me because when you look at it, both 4Runner and Land Cruiser fit within this segment that we call the mid SUV segment, right? So for the most part, the consumer who's in this segment, their considerations consist of Land Cruiser, 4Runner, Jeep Wrangler, Bronco, etc. So these are kind of like the playing field, if you will, when it comes to these vehicles. With that being said, it's a growing segment. A lot more people, a lot more women, for example, multicultural audiences are kind of going out there, getting more into overlanding, really kind of starting to tap into, I guess you could say, these adventurous spaces, if you will. So with that being said, as it comes down to these two vehicles within our lineup, I in a sense, there is a bit of a niche there, but I would also argue that we're kind of pulling away from that niche with this generation of Land Cruiser as well. Again, it's not so exclusionary with this price point. We have an entry price point of $55,000 MSRP. But on top of that, there comes down to a consumer preference, right? So we recently unveiled the all new 4Runner, amazing looking vehicle, right? A lot. Right. And then on top of that, you also have a wider bandwidth when it comes to your trims with 4Runner, right? Not to go through all of them in detail, but Trail Hunter, TRD Pro, for example, right? And again, I just kind of mentioned the two real core trims outside of the special edition, first edition vehicle. It's just Land Cruiser and Land Cruiser 1958, essentially. So all that to say, we are kind of tapping into multiple audiences with both, but I'd say and I'm a visual person, but Land Cruiser kind of comes in a little bit more on that upper tier with price point, but also when it comes to maybe overall styling and you could say I mean, actually, that's really kind of what it really is at the end of the day, styling, but I also say maybe preference, consumer preference.
Yeah, maybe interior creature comforts a bit, and,
Mhm.
and those kind of things as well, comfort and
Yeah.
convenience stuff.
And the preference part, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to talk about powertrain a little bit because it's got a
Yep.
fascinating powertrain, actually, 326 horsepower,
Mhm.
2.4 liter turbocharged engine that also incorporates a hybrid system. Talk a bit about that. I mean, it's certainly an interesting powertrain for an off-road vehicle.
No, it's a great segue. I was actually going to go into that. Yeah, so, and that's kind of where, again, those differences come into with the consumer looking at a 4Runner versus the Land Cruiser, right? Obviously, a 4Runner, you're going to have the flexibility of two different powertrains. You also have third row, for example. So with Land Cruiser, we're so confident in our iForce Max hybrid powertrains that, in a sense, it speaks for itself. And I think initially when we first revealed Land Cruiser, again, 3-year hiatus, completely different looking vehicle from the outside in, right? At the end of the day, it still carries the Land Cruiser name. Honestly, consumers were a little taken aback by like, oh, it's a hybrid. Oh, where's all this familiarity I had with, the Land Cruiser name? But I will say from my most recent ride and drive experiences with the press and media, I think the largest takeaway from that was just the surprise, right? Here you have this iForce Max hybrid powertrain, same powertrain that's shared with the hybrid Tacoma, for example, that's taking on these really technical trails, these routes, and there's no compromise with that. There's no lack of, that confidence when it comes to the overall power and capability. So I think that kind of speaks to not only Land Cruiser, but also the technology of our hybrid powertrains in itself, that we're still not making any compromises on overall performance, and you're still getting something that is comparable to what you would typically get with a gas powertrain. So all that to say, and I also think it just kind of makes a stance in the sense that, we all know how important, I guess if you're close enough to the Land Cruiser name, you know how important that is to Toyota, and for us to kind of reintroduce it into the market, the North America market, as 100% hybrid, I also think that speaks volumes to our overall hybrid messaging strategy.
Right. Well, and capability are very, very important. Certainly with this brand, the Land Cruiser brand has full-time 4-wheel drive, center and rear locking differentials, which are very, very important for full-on off-road capability. It also has the optional front stabilizer bar disconnect, which is, an interesting feature. Very, very off-road oriented, obviously. Enables rock crawling, that kind of thing. Talk about those kind of things, that capability and that equipment level.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to just the DNA, right? We focus more so on what are the essentials to someone who is overlanding, who's off-roading, who's taking their vehicle into the depths of who knows, right? You want to be prepared for everything. But yeah, with the 1958 grade, essentially, you have the you have the center locking differentials. You do not have a stabilizer bar disconnect mechanism standard in that vehicle. However, that is standard in the Land Cruiser grade. But outside of that, you still have your crawl control with downhill assist. You still have some of the most, basic features that you need when it comes to just overall capability and off-roading. Obviously, we pack a little bit more in the higher trim with the Land Cruiser grade. So with that, on top of the standard features, you're also getting the addition of the stabilizer disconnect mechanism. But I think one of the features that was pointed out that you could say kind of fits in both these categories of capability and technology is the fact that we have a multi-terrain monitor and multi-terrain select. And those two functions in tandem really kind of help, again, that novice, a person that's probably not necessarily familiar with off-roading, really kind of feel accustomed and really kind of feel the vehicle, really. I mean, the multi-terrain monitor is, I feel like it's a great tool because you're starting to get the clearance. You're kind of understanding what's around the vehicle, but what's underneath it too, right? You want to curve around the rocks. You don't want to hit your radiator or something like that, right? You're trying to, off-roading's a technical thing, right? I kind of feel like it's almost like chess, right? You're always thinking, right? You're always
you should be thinking ahead. Yeah, you should be
Yeah.
thinking several moves ahead, like you do in chess. It makes all the sense.
Exactly. You're always thinking ahead. You're always kind of, calculating your next move in real time. And like I said, for someone who's not necessarily taking on the trails every single day, but they are a weekend warrior, and they like to, have fun when they can. These systems work to really kind of create that confidence for the consumer, or the driver rather. So all that to say, with the built-in capability and the added technology, it complements the vehicle overall. And this kind of going back to my earlier point, turning the clock backwards and forwards at the same time, we're looking at, again, what's the true DNA of this vehicle, but what can we add on top of that to make it this harmonious experience for the driver? And again, at the end of the day, it's rooted in that adventure. It's rooted in that, wander, right, of just exploring in your truck.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about the personalities of the two trims, because I was taken with I got to drive both vehicles, both trim levels. I was kind of taken with the 1958 trim. Yeah, its simplicity, kind of its retro or throwback kind of feel to it. I mean, I don't know if an 8-inch infotainment screen is exactly throwback, but it's, I guess, more throwback than a 12.3-inch infotainment screen, something like that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, talk about the two personalities, because I think these vehicles have two different personalities.
Yeah, I like that question a lot, because it's something that we talk about. And I'll kind of reiterate something I said before, but you look at the 1958, right? It has those really cool retro iconic headlights. Overall, you have not as much of a scale when it comes to your vehicle options, at least for model year 24 when it comes to that vehicle. However, you're getting the bare bones Land Cruiser. Again, the DNA is there, right? Most people who are getting a Land Cruiser, they're going to kind of go into it, gut it, chop it up, do whatever they want to do anyway to modify it to how they use their vehicle, right? Especially if they're one of those enthusiasts. So that's why we kind of look at that 1958 as an enthusiast blank canvas. They're already going to modify it. They're going to do what they need to do to it to make it their own. Then we have the Land Cruiser. And again, you have to think about, on a marketing side, right? We are hitting a different segment. We're hitting a wider audience, because of the lower MSRP, because of all these things. So with that being said, Land Cruiser is a little bit more mass market to say. Does not water down the brand, does not water down what the Land Cruiser is known for, but you have to kind of understand that for someone who, again, not the everyday off-road, not the everyday adventurer, but likes the appeal and likes what the Land Cruiser can provide for them, that's something that becomes aspirational, but also a lot more obtainable. So Land Cruiser kind of just stands as that vehicle that's kind of, it's the vehicle that I feel like if you want to put to the test, will it get me back? Will it take me there, but will it get me back? That's where the Land Cruiser kind of stands in that function, right? This is for someone who wants to kind of test their ability, but really, again, kind of going back to that inspirational, aspirational point, is this, I want to explore my adventure, my adventurous side. And in the Land Cruiser, I can do that. It's essentially what we think about when we look at the Land Cruiser grade in itself.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. It kind of strikes me too, the 1958 trim might be the blank canvas that you modify yourself based on what you want to do and get into it for a lower price point. The Land Cruiser kind of has what you need, right? I mean, just maybe I guess it's about $6,000 premium for that versus the $55,000, $56,000 of the 1958, and you kind of choose what direction you want to go there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you nailed it. I mean, you look at the two trims side by side, 1958 looks a little bit more minimal in comparison because you don't have the running boards, the roof rails, right? But most people who are probably looking at that one, they're going to do whatever they want to do to that one anyway, right? Same with the technology. I mean, you're getting a smaller screen standard, but at the same time, it's just enough for what you're probably going to do, right, in that vehicle. Whereas with the Land Cruiser trim, yes, you have a little bit more, like I said, the creature comforts. You get the bigger screen. You have the available premium package. So if you want your audiophile, you want your JBL, you want all these things, if you will, you have that option. And again, it kind of blends that mainstream slash still kind of adventure, still kind of want someone who's still on the fringe, if you will, right? But you're still kind of getting that main street creature comforts that you're used to for the most part with any other vehicle, especially vehicles within our lineup. But yeah, with that being said, there's definitely two different personalities, but we're also speaking to two different drivers, two different people who kind of, again, they appeal to this vehicle in a stylistic standpoint. There is this mystique around the Landcruiser badge, right? So it appeals to them in that way. And at the same time, we're giving them the option. If you're more of an enthusiast, you want to go all in, here's 1958. If you're someone who just kind of wants to dip your toe, but unbeknownst to you, you're going to be taken for a wild ride on top of that, you have the Landcruiser.
Right. Of all the features, and I mean, the 2024 Landcruiser has a lot of features. Which one is your favorite? Which one do you think, wow, this is really cool. This is a differentiator for us. This is something we can really, ballyhoo a bit, blow the horn about. What is a feature or two that you feel that way about?
Man, it's hard to pick one, and I'm very biased, but I honestly think for me, because I love, just a little bit about me, I love camping. I love off-roading when I can. Like, I just love being in the outdoors. Am I necessarily a pro at those things? Not necessarily. However, I do like the confidence I do have behind the wheel of it, because one, I love the overall drive of it. The vehicle drives amazingly well, in my opinion. And on top of that, I think for me, honestly, the biggest call out is I love the multi-terrain monitor. I love how that technology functions in a sense that you have these really clear, crisp cameras that are really giving you that 360 of what's going on in the vehicle, what's going on around you. Like I said, it's like playing chess. So rather than having to overthink my next move, I can focus more on the drive. I can focus more on just kind of experiencing it versus, overthinking like, oh, is there a rock there, X, Y, and Z, right? So that's probably one of the larger features that I kind of liken from my experience of driving it. But overall, I mean, there's so many different features within the vehicle. And I think, based upon, obviously based upon the driver, the person behind the wheel, and how they use their vehicle, they're going to find something to love in the Landcruiser.
Yeah, I think so. I certainly love driving it. And Kalifa Sprowl, thanks so much for talking with us of Toyota, talking with us about the all new 2024 Toyota Landcruiser. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Jack.
Great to talk to you, and stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back right here on America on the Road. And that was our interview with Kalifa Sprowl of Toyota, talking about the all-new 2024 Toyota Landcruiser. Our thanks to Kalifa for joining us. And I guess that wraps up our show for this week. Before we go, I'd like to mention my newest book, Dance in the Dark, a crime thriller inspired by true crime, which, aside from cars, is a passion of mine. So look for that at Amazon in both ebook and paperback form. If you like our show, please pass it on. Listen on this radio station. Let your friends know when and where you listen to America on the Road. And, of course, you can pass along a podcast, can't you, Chris?
You can. A quick Google search for the America on the Road podcast will bring you us on all the major platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many others. Like us, leave us a review, download our show. All those things help us, and you can take us wherever you go.
Right. You can even find us on YouTube again these days. We're putting our most recent episodes up on YouTube, so look for that. We kind of resumed doing YouTube versions of the show recently, so look for those. You can see what Chris and I look like. And if we don't scare you too much, you'll come back for another one, we hope. So we would appreciate that. Our deep and profound thanks to our Sports Byline Network stations for carrying America on the Road. And most of all, we'd like to thank you for listening to America on the Road. We know you have a lot of choices out there, so we're honored by the fact you listen to America on the Road. And we hope you join us again next week for another edition of America on the Road.